Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started with our next presentation. Um, our next group is the Climate Adaptation Team. I will not go into a great description on it. This is a team that was mentored by both myself and Professor Rick Johnson and Adam Glenn. And Adam Glenn is the outside mentor, and he'll give you his overview here. One of the things when I looked at that last team I wanted to point out is we don't just have business and journalism students here. We've got students also from arts and sciences. We have PhD candidates. We even have some physicians in the group. So this is quite a talented group of students here. This is also our capstone class for the Center for the Digital Globe. And the Center for the Digital Globe stretches over 4 different schools, but really over the entire university. And we have around 70 students in our undergraduate program and 30 in our graduate program. And we've been around since about the year 2000. And the importance here is not only digital communication, but all the things that are happening digitally throughout our world and educating our students in that way. So with that, I'll turn over the team here, the Climate Adaptation Team, and let them take it off.
Hello and bonjour from Paris. I'm sorry that I can't be there with you at this culminating event, but unfortunately it coincides with a long-standing plan for a family trip to France, where I am now. As they say, timing is everything. Actually, timing is the reason that I think the product I'm pitching here has such a great chance of success, because I think the timing is right for a news information product that can change the dynamic of the climate change conversation. First, there's some bad news. Climate impacts, serious ones, are already hitting us and are expected to get much worse. Extreme weather like worsening storms, coastal flooding, heat waves, drought. In the coming few decades, the economic losses will be huge, hundreds of billions of dollars in the U.S. alone. Now, some worse news. There's global disarray among nations on the efforts to prevent the worst effects of climate change. But there's also good news. People, according to polls, are increasingly convinced of the serious nature of the problem. And in research that I conducted with the Reynolds Journalism Institute, people also respond especially well to information about adapting to extreme weather. Framing the conversation around adaptation has a kind of healing effect. There's more good news. While nations grapple with how to respond, many local governments and businesses are starting to take on the climate threat themselves. So there's hope for progress from technological innovation, from energy market trends, and from the positive economic impact of a green energy transition. But there's a challenge. At the same time that communities and industries are moving to adapt, there's really limited information sources about adaptation. But that's our sweet spot, the information opportunity around adaptation to the climate change challenge. Communities, businesses, organizations, experts, news consumers are all increasingly thirsty for adaptation information. And I see an opportunity to build a news business around that need. I have already built, with RJI's support, a working database and a guide for reporters to get up to speed on the climate adaptation story. But we need much more. So the challenge I threw down to the students was to help me continue to build up robust content while finding a viable and sustainable revenue source, a business plan to help us realize our ambitions, an ongoing stream of funds, a financial backbone. So to put it all together, I'm aiming for an outsized impact on the climate change challenge by leveraging news and information about adaptation to impending climate impacts. But what I need is a business strategy for a sustainable revenue stream to support that mission. After working with students for several months and hearing some very exciting ideas, I'm thrilled to see the business plan they've developed that will help me do all that. Looking forward to it. Thanks again, and from Paris, signing out.
Well, good morning. We are Team Roca. I am, sorry, this isn't. Thank you for stopping the clock. All right, wonderful. Okay, so as we were saying, I'm Sipro Komura, this is Ellery, Brett, and Leo, and we are Team Roca. This morning we'd like to take you through a little bit of background on our project, go directly to our recommendations as well as how we're going to implement those, touch briefly upon our marketing as well as our financials. So to begin, according to the UN, climate change is the defining issue of our time, and this is the defining moment. We are the first generation to feel the effects of climate change, like in 2017 in Pulaski County, where 14 different locations across southern Missouri reported record-level flooding, or even more recently in Nebraska and Iowa, just last month when states of emergency were declared after the flooding of the Platte, Missouri, and Elkhorn rivers. This begs the question, what are we as a community to do in the face of a changing climate? Well, there's not just one solution, but one that's being proposed right now by Roca is to better inform journalists, providing them with a guide on how to reframe the story of climate adaptation so that they can better inform the public. And I know that Adam said that Roca is a database. It's a bit of a misnomer. Roca is actually a website with a collection of data and information resources that it links out to from this site, organized and very searchable, but again, a website. So we thought it might be helpful for the audience to be kind of taken through the user's journey of this site. So journalists essentially go to Roca, where they gather information on the page, use its guide and its and news backgrounders, and then are promptly sent out from Roca to these official sources and sites. Essentially, Roca acts as a portal to information both on its site as well as to these other sources off of its site. So to give a little bit of background on the challenge that we were presented with finding a sustainable revenue model for Roca, Roca currently has no funding. It's essentially a free service. Additionally, because of the highly specialized and limited pool of its target market, journalists, right, we have a limited ability for revenue generation. And finally, and probably most importantly, its value is fleeting. So directly into our recommendations, if we are to find the sustainable revenue model, the first thing that has to be done is to develop Roca's value. So how are we going to do that? Coming back here, what we are proposing, right, is that Roca becomes the data and information amalgamator. What we're proposing is that we use and build assets to scrape information from the web, organize it, display it, and make it meaningful to its target audience. We essentially become not the portal, but the destination. Secondly, to move into sustainable revenue, what we are proposing is that Roca, again, aggregates data sets, builds tools and assets, as well as a database to house those data sets, presenting that information to journalists in the form of data that can pepper their climate adaptation stories, which can then be filtered to the public. But then we're left with that one last question, which is the revenue piece. So we're suggesting to build a subscription model for engineers working also in that climate adaptation field. So why engineers? Well, engineers represent an existing market that is used to using data aggregate services and paying very well for them. Secondly, through our research, we uncovered an overlapping need between journalists as well as engineers, both for a centralized repository of information as well as the subject matter and topics of information that they were both looking for. Secondly, engineers are tasked with taking action right now in the face of a changing climate, in the form of infrastructure, as well as serving as that public nexus. So, therefore, our recommendations become one, to strengthen ROCA's value proposition by aggregating data, as well as developing the tools and the database in which to serve both of these markets. Secondly, we are proposing to expand these target markets to include engineers as well as to limit the scope of this initial project, because climate adaptation is so huge, right? To simply water. Now, why water? Well, water infrastructure is critical, right? Not just for safe and reliable drinking water, but also to mitigate the environmental impacts that human beings are having right now. Secondly, the rise of extreme storm events has increased the prominence as well as the market for water infrastructure. Secondly, the growing prominence of water as a resource, both now and in the future, is extreme. Finally, our third recommendation is to develop a 5-year plan in which keenly focuses on the revenue evaluation as well as looks at pivoting ROCA's initial offering of going after or providing information to journalists to instead pivot it to a direct engagement of the public. Now here's Brett to go over some of our research findings.
Thank you, Seabrook. So up on the board behind me right now is a quick snapshot of some of the interviews we conducted to support our proposal. And there's really two big things that I want to get across with these interviews. One is that everybody that we interviewed expressed interest in buying this product, even as a concept. But secondly, when asked what kind of information they would need to better their work lives, we found a lot of overlap, as you can see from this infographic. Now, when thinking about the value that we could provide to both sectors, there's quite a few things that we find. One is saving time, and that we believe goes to both sectors. Now, this information that they are asking for is widely available online, mostly for free, but the problem is that it's scattered. It is hard to find. It's hidden in reports and articles and government databases. So we provide value by bringing it in, making it easy to access, and also cleaning the data so that it's usable in their work lives. Now, secondly is a platform. Both sectors really value a platform, but I'll kind of talk about that in a little bit. So focusing in on journalists, they really want official sources, transparency, and specific data. Whereas the water professionals, they want to win projects, minimize risk, and purchase categorical data. And we believe that through our proposal, we can offer both sectors exactly what they want. Going into the data and technology behind our proposal, I first want to go back to the platform. Now, imagine, if you will, this platform where journalists can interact with other journalists as well as the public to share climate adaptation stories on a national level as well as a local level. Imagine you flip that tab, and now you're on a different platform where water professionals can interact with each other. Through our research, we have found that the water technicians are currently looking for ways to market themselves to the engineering firms to get their products out there. And in turn, engineering firms are looking for anything to give them a competitive advantage, which is mostly through technology. There's a lot of great things that we can provide if we can provide them networking opportunities. Imagine you flip that tab again and there's a login. And if you have a subscription to our service, you could access our full database. And really the key thing here is that we are pooling resources so that water professionals, journalists, and the public can all work together to help with climate adaptation. To talk more about the technology behind our proposal, I'm going to pass it off to Leo.
Thank you, Brett. Let me use this. Thank you. So this is how it works. First, we have the websites. Websites related to the water industry and climate adaptation. And then we have the data scraping technology. With this technology, we will be able to feed our database. Our database will have three main features. We have a SQL feature that will send all this information to our website. We have a central location with this storage feature, and at the same time, we have artificial intelligence and machine learning. All this will improve this database, learning day by day from the performance of the database itself, and at the same time from our customers and users. On the website, we have two main services. We have memberships and datasets. Memberships for engineers and datasets for journalists. They will be able to see all this information, not only on our website, but at the same time, they can download it in multiple files, Excel, data files, and coding files. On the center of this cycle, we have the technology staff. The technology staff will make sure all this process is working perfectly. I want to show you a proof of concept. It doesn't have a user interface. However, we want to create value. We were able to scrape some information from the City Council minutes and meetings. And here we can see that if we use a keyword, as you can see here, treatment plan, it will show all the results in which that keyword was addressed in all those meetings. Here we have two examples. It doesn't mean that this is all that we can get from datasets. It's just two simple examples. We have water quality dataset and lead generation dataset. What if we can categorize it by state, year, and even topic? Here we have rising extreme storm events. Also here we have some contracts. We have expiration dates. In this way, some companies know when they can take over these contracts. Now, we know this information is on the internet. However, we know it is often hard to find, and it moves around a lot. That's why we believe we are the solution, because we will have all this information on a central location. And now let's talk about marketing.
Thank you, Leo. So talking a little bit on marketing, first I want to bring up our price point. Up here, you'll see comparable subscription prices for annual subscriptions, and we have identified two competitors, those being GovSpend and Dodge. I do want to mention, though, that both GovSpend and Dodge are focused on construction, and we just found them as our nearest competitor because they could feasibly pivot to the water industry. We placed ourselves in between them, in between their price points. One, because we thought that this was pretty feasible, but two, according to our research, we asked our interviewees what they would be willing to pay, and they said that they would easily pay $15,000. Moving on into promotion, we plan on really getting our name out there mostly through personal selling. We plan on hiring a full-time seller in this proposal, but we also find that there is value in promoting ourselves at conferences. We want to promote ourselves at the IRE conference. We have been in contact with IRE, and IRE has expressed interest in partnering with us, which would be huge in terms of capturing some journalistic markets. And we also want to target the WEFTech conference because according to our interviews, WEFTech is the place to go to get water information. Now, talking about the implementation timeline, we firstly need to secure funding, and we plan on doing that by getting grants. Secondly, once we have those grants, we'll build the database, the tech, and the team. Then we'll get into promoting, which, as I mentioned, is going to be mostly through personal selling and conferences. Then finally, we will reinvest. All these profits will be reinvested into our business via the website, the database, content for the platform, and reinvest also back into that build phase. Finally, we hope to adapt. Not only adapt the world, as that's one of our goals, is to help climate adaptation, but also adapt the business to any future market trends, perhaps enter into new business segments, et cetera, just so that we can ensure future success. Now, in terms of funding opportunities, we have identified a few, the MacArthur Foundation, CRF, and the Kresge Foundation. And we believe that these are really good potential grants because all of them have funded similar projects in the past. But to talk more about financials, I'm going to pass it off to Ellery.
Hi, everyone. So before we show you our exciting financial numbers, we want to share some of our assumptions in the projection. So first, we assume that the nature of our business can qualify us to operate under the non-profit status, and this will be a tax-saving advantage for us. And second, though what we are providing to our clients is the annual subscription service, but we are also considering to provide them with the monthly payment option, which will release their financial pressure and make them more willing to purchase our product. And in our projection, we assume that all of our clients will take this option, and since it's also the worst case scenario for our cash position. And third, we are going to secure a fund of $107,000 by July 2019, and this number could ensure that the cash on hand stay positive for at least the first year. And we conservatively projected 18 subscription sales and 2 dataset sales in the first year. We project no sales in the first month, which is kind of reasonable, and only 1 sales in 5 of the months. However, we expect to sell more in September and the following months, because September is the time when WebTech, the global leading conference, take place. So at that time, our salesperson could get the opportunity to directly interact with our potential clients. And based on this 18 subscription, we expect to gain $270,000 revenue from the first year sales. And regarding the expenses, we projected $33,000 for the pre-startup expenses, which will include our cost in the website setup, the database setup, as well as the legal service and the purchase of equipment. And we also projected $230,000 for our operational expenses in the first year, which will mainly include our staffing expenses, the technology support, as well as the promotional expenses. So based on what we project for the revenue and expenses, we expect to break even after the 18 subscription sales. And do you still remember this magic number? Yes, this is what we conservatively and reasonably projected for the number of sales in the first year. And since we are just going to break even, the profits for the first year is not a lot. It's only around $4,000. But don't worry, if we can expect a 15% growth in each year, and we assume that the operational structure and the expenses will stay relatively stable, we can expect the $42,000 in profit in the second year. And for the third year, we stimulated a $20,000 expenses increase, and we can still generate around $60,000. And this is a time we can expect to reinvest in our business and invest in the mission of Roca. Now I'm going to pass it back to Seabrook for the conclusion.
Thank you, Ellery. So, in conclusion, our recommendations are 1, to strengthen Roca's value proposition, 2, to expand its target market, and 3, develop a 5-year plan in which it can pivot to directly engaging the public, as well as have a strong and keen focus on revenue evaluation. If we are to rise up and meet the challenges of a changing climate, we have to do so by living in our strengths as a community together. We are the first generation to feel the effects of climate change, and we are the last generation with the ability to do something about it. Any questions?
Nice job.
Thank you.
So we know that in journalism, it's not like journalists get a license or there's any sort of like certification to say this person is a journalist. So one of the things I wondered about was whether or not you have any exclusive content or something for engineers that will make them want to pay. Because the first thing I thought about was what would prevent or keep an engineering firm from claiming journalist status to be able to use it and not have to pay the license. If I understand it correctly, the journalists don't have to pay the license, but the engineers do.
Well, and can I piggyback? Actually, if you can go to the slide where you have the flow chart and it gets to the website and there's an arrow that goes down to membership and there's an arrow that goes down to database, I think is what you're talking about.
The one that loops around. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's yes.
So in our perfect world, the engineers would have a login portal, right, for their subscription. And then, if I'm understanding your question correctly, and then the journalists would be able to access a lot of this information for free with links on the public sites. And so I don't anticipate the engineers producing content. Is that what your question is?
Well, what I'm saying is, so I sold services for the Associated Press for a while, and so sometimes you have people that claim to hold another status in order to get around making payments. And so what I'm asking is did you think about or consider how to make sure that the people that you want to pay are going to be paying but not able to say, well, we actually have an engineer newsletter and we're producing journalism, so we therefore could be on the free side.
Oh yeah, that is totally going to be vetted through the personal sales touch.
Okay.
As with a lot of high price point B2B services, these are primarily vetted as well as walked through a very strong sales cycle, coming to do presentations. I don't believe that we're going to be able to. I don't see it being a problem that the engineers would claim a journalistic status, therefore get a free login. I think that there'll be, because it's such a limited number right now, just 18, there'll be a fairly easy process to manage. So it's going to be very important in the future. It's a very good place.
We also,
Could you speak into the mic, please?
excuse me one moment. We also think that there's a lot of added benefit besides the database, as we mentioned, the platform and all of the other things that you get via your subscription. And although that might not be all the motivation to pay, like, we believe it's a good motivator to keep the engineering water professionals honest. So.
And this is piggybacking off of that first question. Maybe I'm confused and I'm not sure what the difference in services are for engineers and journalists, because according to this, it looks like the journalists have access to data sets, which is what I think the engineers would want. But then you had mentioned that the journalists are interested because they'll be contributing content, not getting content.
No, both, actually.
Okay.
So, but we plan to allow the data sets that we create for journalists, because they want to consume information in different ways, right? So the information that we can provide on the website for free, that would also be accessible to the public, would include data sets like that are fairly simplified.
Or aggregated, maybe.
Where engineers are looking for a lot more complete data, right? Information regarding bacteria counts in water with very specific titles and numbers, right? Where water quality expressed in different types of nutrients, such as ammonia or phosphorus. Very detailed information that isn't necessarily as consumable or desirable to a journalist per se, or to the public until you edit, right, represent and repackage some of that information so that it can become meaningful to someone who is outside the realm of a pure science perspective. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so by taking information such as the rise of extreme storm events that we're seeing, across the United States, but maybe more prominent in the Northeast, right, which has seen 75% rise since 1948, or in Missouri, which has seen about 50% rise. These are very meaningful statistics and information for me as a layperson, right, or I believe for the general public, where I think an engineer would want information regarding very specific, not discussed in percentages, information regarding, inches, the way it affected water quality in terms of dilution of ammonia or phosphorus in our open waters, groundwater pollution, as measured by younger groundwater, such as surface or deep groundwater, the older, et cetera. So it would be presented in a very different format.
Two questions. One, somebody had mentioned the nonprofit status of this. What nonprofit status would that fall under? And the reason I ask is there's about 21, 27 nonprofit statuses you can get. I'm just curious how this would be a nonprofit.
The ultimate mission of our project will support the journalists to report on the climate adaptation and generate the public awareness. And we think this create the public welfare, so that should qualify us for the nonprofit status.
Okay. And then the other part would be sustainability, because you're going to only have so many water engineers that need this. How do you move it to the next level, and what would be that next level? If you look at construction, I think you talked about two of y'all's competitors are in the engineering construction arena. So how do you move to that? What's that movement next?
So I actually wanted to come back to your question about the not-for-profit, because I believe that ROCA has a not-for-profit status right now in its current filing. Secondly, the how do you move to the next level? Yeah. So other arenas in climate change, and there are so many, right? If you think about it, the amount of ways in which our lives are touched by climate, I think the next big ones could include public health, right? And public health information, as well as medicine. They could include air quality, which is another huge arena. It can include acidity levels specifically in ocean, right, versus freshwater amalgamations of the database. It can include forestry. There are a multitude of issues that are also ever changing as more and more information and more study has been given to the issue of climate change. It could be temperature. I mean, I can go on if you want. Okay.
That's good.
Very good. Thank you very much. We have a 10-minute break.